Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. Yeah, I appreciate the sound. Very good. How's that? All right. Very good. Very good. Anyway, yes, thank you, and I do appreciate this, especially these trying times that the city is going through. In fact, this past winter, I had spent 50% of the winter in an ashram in the temple where Krishna temple, where we didn't have any visitors, of course, during the pandemic, but we got to worship God and had very intimate group and stuff. It was really quite a blessing. I learned a lot. I was able to revive a lot of my spiritual side. So that was quite a blessing. And so with that, we're going to talk today about the Mahabharata. And those familiar with Mahabharata? It's actually a great story. It's great history. And the Bhagavad Gita is the culmination of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was written by great sage thousands of years ago, and the Bhagavad Gita is the cream. The Mahabharata is more of a history of what has happened day by day, but it leads up to Krishna speaking the Bhagavad Gita, which develops our love for God and understanding the God, who God is, why we're all gathered here, and like that. So it's like if you've ever had milk directly from a cow, milk that hasn't been pasteurized or homogenized or any other enzymes, it has a thick cream that's on the top of the milk. Which is very magical, and that's Bhagavad Gita, it's like the cream of the Mahabharata. So anyway, before we get started, I'd like to open up a prayer. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual teacher opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. I also offer my humble obeisances unto the Supreme Lord. I bow before all those who follow in his footsteps in the spirit of devotion. May you bless us with this study of the Mahabharata, growth, understanding, patience, compassion. Help us cleanse our hearts and our minds, that we may receive this knowledge with which you wish us to know, so that our lives may become more fruitful in learning about you and ourselves and the relationship between us all. In your holy name, we pray. So this Mahabharata, Maha means great, Bharat, it means, one translation is the land of India. Bharat was also a king many generations back, I don't know how many thousands of years back. And so the land, India, was named after him, Bharat. Bharat also, especially in those days, refers to the entire earth. So this is considered the story of the earth, the story of the land where we were originally born from. This is also one of the longest epics in world literature. Within it contains all the possible elements that a story should have. It has conflict, duty, sacrifice, heroism, truth, justice, romance, adventure, fantasy, and relationships. It's truly a very all-encompassing saga. So the root core of this story is about a dynastic struggle for the throne of Hastinapur. Hastinapur is was the largest kingdom, the most important kingdom within India. It was ruled by a clan called the Kurus. And so this Mahabharata tells generations, actually about 4 generations leading up to Krishna, which leads up to the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, like I said, is contained within Mahabharata. Bhagavad Gita is Bhagavan and the Supreme Lord. Gita is the song, so it's the song of God. So this Bhagavad Gita is really, in essence, recorded conversation that Krishna spoke personally. And like you look in the New Testament and you have that section in red where Jesus spoke. That's like what the Gita is Krishna speaking. And it's in this Gita that he teaches us everything about himself, God, who we are, the soul, all about life and how we can develop our love for God. And that's the purpose of this Mahabharata, to bring us to understanding and loving God. The Mahabharata, it is very, very long. It is over 100,000 verses, and it contains almost 2 million words. It is considered, it's more than 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. I have about 45 minutes to tell this story, which should probably, if it was sung, it's actually not a poem or song, it would probably take weeks. So contained within this story that is a surface or a little meaning. I mean, these are actually real events that really happened. And there's also a deeper spiritual meaning. There's also a relationship between everything that happens and what is going on within us, within our psyche, within our minds. So as we read through, as I discuss this story, we can look for those correlations. Seeing things from different perspectives helps us see a whole picture more clearly. Every one of us, we look from different angles. It's one of the blessings of this church, and we embrace all different faith walks, and everyone has a different point of view. Not any one of us is in possession of the fullness of God's truth. Our ego says my way is the correct way, and everybody else is not correct. That is a false notion of the ego. Every one of us has a true vision of God from their own perspective. Kind of a diamond has many faucets, and it reflects light in different ways. When you stand back, you can see the light emanating all around. Very beautiful picture. So, finally, simply, we really do need each other to understand. So, where should we start? I mean, also, I want you to know this is kind of an open forum, so all along the way, the story, if anybody has a question or a thought and they want to share, please feel free to check. We could take a look, I guess we could start at the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is really kind of in the center of Mahabharata. But the Bhagavad Gita opens up, the first verse, read to in this Bhagavad Gita, is as follows. Dhritarashtra said, O Sanjaya, after assembling in the place of pilgrimage at Kurukshetra, what did my sons and the sons of Pandu do, being desirous to fight? So here we have a couple characters. This is something that confused me when I was a kid reading this Bhagavad Gita for the first time when I was 16. With all these big words, I kind of got lost and didn't understand. But after many readings, I did finally get a grip on this book. Every time I read it, I learn more and more and more and understand more. So not only are you hearing and benefiting, but me as a speaker is also benefiting. And there's a gathering of spiritual knowledge. Everybody benefits. Even everything around us benefits spiritually. In fact, we were just talking to Bill. I said, if there's nobody here, we can speak to the walls and preach to them. In the spiritual world, everything is alive. Everything is full of consciousness. So the walls will be conscious, the floor is conscious, the sky, the river, the water, the air, everything has consciousness. We can take on any form of life. We could be a flower waiting for Krishna to walk by, and we're just patiently feeling the separation of love. And when he finally does walk by, he brush against us and feel it. Let alone, if you're the flute being played by Krishna and having the nectar coming out of his lips, he feels extreme love. So here we have in the Gita this opening statement. Dhritarashtra, he's the king, and he's a blind king. He was blind at birth, and we'll discuss how he came to power. Anyway, he has 100 sons, and his sons, who he loves very dearly, are fighting with his brother's kids, who they're considered brothers, but they're actually cousins. And Dhritarashtra has these 100 sons headed by Duryodhana. He's the number one son. And his cousins are the Pandavas. They're born from King Pandu. Pandu was a brother to Dhritarashtra. In fact, Pandu was actually, he was presented as king, but he passed on, and Dhritarashtra became king. So the Pandavas consist of Arjuna, who's one of the lead characters in the Bhagavad Gita, who Krishna speaks to, and his older brother Yudhishthir, and then there's Bhima and Nakul and Sahadev. These are the 5 Pandavas. And they are very righteous. They follow God. They are best friends to Krishna. They respect God and they worship God, and they are very pious. They are always operating in the modes of goodness, versus how we sometimes fall down into ignorance and passion. Well, the sons of Dhritarashtra, they are very passionate. They were younger, and so they weren't really entitled to rule the kingdom, but due to their greediness and evil, they wanted to rule the kingdom. They had many ill dealings with the Pandavas, who were supposed to rule the kingdom. And they couldn't settle. And the king, Dhritarashtra, he was very partial to his kids. He was not really following the ideals of a king. In another Hindu literature called the Ramayana, we have a king called Ram, who's an incarnation of Vishnu, Krishna. And that would be a topic for another talk one day. But he was very righteous, and the best thing a king can do is do what the people need and service the needs of the people. A king should consider the whole kingdom, his family, and his children, and the king acting properly will do the needful. Whereas Dhritarashtra, due to emotional attachment for his son, favored his son, and even though it was wrong, he was like that. In fact, his blindness, which was a physical ailment at birth, he was also spiritually blind. That's one of the first correlations. So he's speaking, he's asking Sanjaya. Sanjaya is his servant. And he's asking his servant, what is going on, on the battlefield at Kurukshetra? What are my sons and the sons of my brother doing there? He knows they're getting ready to fight. Now, a little side story here. Sanjaya, they're in the palace, and there was a great sage by the name of Vyas, who was actually Dhritarashtra's biological father. And he had come just before this war was about to start, and he says to Dhritarashtra, I can give you divine vision. This great sage, he has all these amazing abilities and powers. He says, I can give it where you have divine vision, so you actually see from here, you can see what's going on in the battlefield. Dhritarashtra actually turned him down and says, no, I don't want to be able to see. He already realized, he's starting to realize how evil he's been, and he doesn't want to see what's going to happen. He just wants to know what's going to happen. He's optimistic his sons are going to win, but this is like the great battle of good and evil. And ultimately, good always seems to come up with victory. But still, out of emotion, he's siding with his 100 sons. So he asked his servant, can you give my servant this divine vision? And so that's what happens. And Sanjaya, the servant, gets this divine vision. And he is relating everything that's going on in this war. So this first chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about who's on what side. You've got, on one side, you've got Duryodhana and his 100 brothers, the evil ones. And they've also got with them Bhisma. Bhisma is a key player in the Mahabharata, which we're going to hear about a lot about him. He is the grandsire, just like a grandfather to the boys. And he, back in the day, swore an oath to protect the kingdom and the throne. And unfortunately, when he made this oath, he didn't take into consideration that the throne could be overrun by evildoers. And because of this oath, even though he was extremely God-fearing man, he had to protect the throne, which means standing behind Duryodhana and his evil brothers. There was also a teacher and another family priest who also were, due to their positions, had to side with evil. Even in their hearts, they did not want evil to win. Then on the other side, you've got Arjuna and his brothers, Yudhishthir, who should have been next king, because he was the oldest of the 5 Pandus, and all his friends and supporters on this side. So just before this war, they blow all their conch shells. They announce the beginning of this war, and they're just getting ready to do battle. This is the first chapter in Bhagavad Gita. So then Arjuna, who says to Krishna is actually his charioteer, and he's driving the chariot for Arjuna. Krishna swore an oath that he would not pick up a weapon in this battle, but he will drive the chariot for Arjuna. So Arjuna says, I want you to, put this chariot in between the two armies. I want to see who's here to fight this war. So that brings us into the second chapter. So I'm going to read you text 2 in the second chapter. This is in Sanskrit, I'll read first. And these verses are actually sung. It goes, Shri Bhagavan Vacha, Pastakashmalam Nitam, Vishamesam Upastitam, Naya Dushtam Asvargam, Atitikaram Arjuna. It translates, the Supreme Person, Bhagavan, Krishna, says, My dear Arjuna, how have these impurities come upon you? They are not at all befitting a man who knows the progressive values of life. They do not lead to higher planets, but to infamy. So I should tell you that just before this was spoken by Krishna, Arjuna had looked at both sides of the army and he saw who was here to fight. He saw on one side all his loved ones, his family. On the other side, he sees his grandfather, his teacher, the priest, all his brothers. Even though they were quarreling throughout life, he's saying, how can I fight this war? How can I battle these people? This is my family. Even if I should win, what good is that? They're all going to be dead. And what kind of enjoyment will we have to enjoy this right afterwards? So Krishna is telling them, hey, you're getting very emotional and very mental, and you need to know who you are and who I am, and you need to know what life is all about, and you have to understand that when someone does bad, you have to cut them out. I mean, it's like your hand gets gangrene on it, you have to cut it off. If you don't, your whole body will die, to save the body, So he teaches them everything about life, the eternality of the soul, and all that is contained within this Bhagavad Gita. And you have to understand, that we're all eternal, You've had many lifetimes, I've had many lifetimes, you've forgotten yours, but I remember mine. He says, you're worried about killing these people that are doing evil, they're going to live again. They've lived in the past. In the past life, you died, and so many people mourned you, but you don't even remember any of this. So why are you getting all sentimental now? Anyway, on and on he goes and explains all that. And at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna wakes up and he understands who he is. And he says, okay, I'm ready to fight this battle. So, like I said earlier, this actually happened, but there's also a very wonderful symbology to all of this. The battlefield, Kurukshetra, it also means the field of the body. So where this battle is taking place is also within us, within our bodies. The 5 Pandavas, they also represent our senses: hearing, seeing, tasting, feeling, willing, touch, smell. The chariot represents the mind, and the charioteer is like the intelligence, and Arjuna is like the soul. So we are riding a chariot through life, and our soul is in our bodies, and we have our mind, the chariot, and through the senses we relate to the outside world, and it's through the senses that we come in contact with sense objects, and it's when we come in contact with these sense objects we build attachment for them. So if we hear something really beautiful, the soul said, oh, I hear something very beautiful. My mind is hearing something very beautiful. My intelligence, Krishna, you're the charioteer. Drive me over to where this sound is, and I want to hear it. It sounds so beautiful. So like this, we are dragged all over the battlefield. And if, with the case of Krishna and Arjuna, our intelligence is centered on God, we will be taken to the right place, the spiritual place. If our intelligence is centered on musty things and like that, we will be directed there. So then Yodin, the blind king, he also represents our inner being and our blindness to spiritual life. And if we are in tune with that blindness, and then we have these 100 suns, these are the 100 desires that lead us astray. So like this, there's a symbology in this Bhagavad Gita. So there's 2 ways of looking at this. So how did all this begin? How did all this start? This is the story of Mahabharata. So we go back about 3 or 4 generations, and there was a king by the name of Shantanu. And this king, he was very righteous, he was God-fearing, and the kingdom was flourishing, everything was beautiful. One day he's on a hunting expedition, and he gets thirsty, so he goes to the Ganges River for a sip of water, and to quench his thirst. While he's there, he sees a beautiful woman, more beautiful than anything he's ever seen before, and he falls in love with her. This happens to be Mother Ganges. Her name is Ganga. And he approaches her with the proposition for marriage. He fell in love with her, and as king, it's not like this, of a physical relationship, and like that, you actually get married and make it more a spiritual relationship. So he asked her for her hand in marriage, and she says, "I will marry you under one condition, that no matter what I do, you never question me." And he thought, "Oh, well, okay, I can do that. I'll be happy to oblige." So they get married, and he takes her to his palace, and she soon becomes pregnant. And when she gives birth to her first child, she picks up that child, takes him to the river, and drowns the child. So the king, he was kind of beside himself, and he's a little disturbed, but remember what she said, do not question anything I do. Otherwise, you'll never see me again. She didn't say a word. So time goes by, and she gets pregnant again. Same thing happens with the same baby. She takes the baby through and drowns the baby, and she goes back to the palace. And again, the king was silent. This happened 5 more times, 7 children, she drowns. Now she's pregnant with the 8th child, and she has taken this 8th child to the river after it's born. The king, he can't take it anymore. And he said, I can't do this. Why are you doing this? What is the reason? Why are you killing our babies? I just can't understand. She says, well, I'll tell you the story. So long ago, there were these 8 demigods. Demigods, they are they're immortal, they're very advanced souls, they are pure devotees of God, and they are in the heavens, they're in charge of everything. In the Hindu philosophy, there's a demigod behind everything that happens. There's God of the sun, God of the moon, God of the rain, God of the clouds, God of the waters. In fact, you can't even blink your eyes without a demigod allowing this to happen. So that there's these types of beings. So there was 8 of them that were very friendly, and they had taken their waters to a holiday one day. And they had come to a hermitage. The sage of the hermitage was out somewhere in the forest doing his meditations, and they saw this most beautiful cow. Most sages would have a cow that was considered their wealth. The cow provides milk and nourishment and like that. And a lot of times they have these cows from the heavenly planet that anything after this cow could produce for them. This is how these sages would survive. Well, the wives, one wife in particular, she told her husband, I think this cow is beautiful, and there's nobody here, we should take this cow. So they all, got together and decided to take the cow. And one sage in particular went and grabbed the cow and pulled it away. So they had left, and the sage had returned to his hermitage, and the cow was gone, and with his spiritual vision, he could look and they can see past, present, future. He could see exactly what happened. So he cursed these 8 sages. He says, I curse you to take mortal birth. You'll have to be born on earth and live a life of mortality and no longer immortal. This for the demigods was great punishment. And the wives got very upset, and they said, oh gosh, this is terrible. So they went back to the sage, they brought the cow back and said, please forgive us, please don't allow this curse to happen. We want to lose our husbands. And the sage says, I can't take the curse back. Once something is spoken, you can't take it back. It's like you shoot an arrow, you shoot a gun. Once that bullet is released, once that arrow is released, you can't stop it. You can't just take it back. Well, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to shoot the gun. It's going to go. But he says, what I can do is I can minimize the effects of the curse. It's like, you could shoot the arrows in a different direction, something like that. He says, will have to take birth, but they can return immediately after they are born. In fact, Mother Ganga, they should approach Mother Ganga because she has also been cursed to go to earth and release all her waters by the Hindu rites. They consider it very pure. That if you bathe in the Ganges waters, you're free from all your sins. It's like a spiritual water of healing. So she's going to be born on earth. So that's a whole other story, which we may not have time to tell that story. But anyway, they will take birth from her, and she will immediately drown them in her waters, where they will be free from this curse and return to the position as immortal demigods. So this is the story behind the drowning. And then she turns to the king and says, "But you questioned what I was doing, and as I told you, I will now leave you. And I am taking my 8th son with me. When he grows up, I'll return him to you." So she enters into her waters with her son. And when the son becomes a young boy, she returns the son back to the king. And the king is very happy to see her son, and now he raises the son as a single child, like this. Until some time goes by, they grow very attached to each other. And the king is once again on a hunting expedition, and he runs into another very beautiful woman, and he falls in love with her. He wants to marry her. Her name is Santander, and she is the daughter of the king of the fisherman tribe. So the king of the fishermen, he finds out that Santander wants to marry his daughter. He says, "Well, that can only happen under one condition. We're going to have an older son who is destined to become the next king. But if you marry my daughter, her children must become king, and they must rule like that." And so the king was definitely thinking of his daughter's, future and well-being. Well, Shantanu, he cannot do this to his son. His son named Bhisma. So he is back at his palace, and he is all dressed in mourning clothes, he's done the sacrifice. Well, his son finally figured out what has happened here, and he is very disturbed. He says, "I'm the next king, I need my father to be happy." So he approaches the king of the fishermen and asks for the daughter's hand in marriage. And the king says to him, "Yes, but I don't want you to become king. I want my children to become the next king." So Bhisma swears an oath that he will not become the next king. In fact, he swears an oath of celibacy so that he can't have any children, so that this generation won't become king. That only Satyavati and her sons will become king, and the next generation of kings to rule us in the world. He also takes an oath that he will protect the throne till his last days, to ensure that her and her descendants will become king. When the father finds out about this, he's very, very grateful, and he marries Satyavati and has 2 sons. Meanwhile, he's also blessed his son Bhisma that he cannot die except by his own free will. So even though he'll start getting older, he won't be able to be. He can't kill him. Nothing can kill him. Only when he decides he wants to leave his body will he die. So Satyavati has these 2 sons. One is called Chitangada, and the other is Chitragada. Chitangada, he's the older son, he becomes king. But he gets a disease, probably a disease or something, and he dies right away. So Vichitragada, the younger son, becomes king. Now, when he becomes king, he is like a drunkard and debauchery, and he's all kinds of nonsense. And so the mob said, "Well, we got to get this boy married, because he's just not going to be the king. He's not going to continue." So, in the neighboring kingdom, kingdom of Kashi, there's a king there, and he has 3 daughters. Their names are Amba, Ambika, and Ambika. And he's going to get his daughters, princesses, married. They have what's known as called a fireball, a special ceremony, where when a king has a daughter, the daughter gets to choose who her husband will be. And so they have this big ceremony. They call all the neighboring princes and kings from all around and invite them to the ceremony. And she walks through and sees who's there with a garland. She puts it around her head person she wants to marry. Sometimes there's a contest involved to show who's their chivalry can do this amazing stuff, and that would qualify them to be the groom. Well, the Chitravirya was not invited. They had not invited anybody from the kingdom of Hashtinapur. So Bhisma Day, he's a little upset, and he's instructed by his mother to go and kidnap these three women and bring them back so that their son can marry them. So he does this. He goes, and Bhisma Day, he's like the best archer in the world. He's a super warrior. He's his celibacy and his powers are just beyond. So he goes and he kidnaps these three daughters. He takes them out of the assembly. Everyone's a little upset, but what can they do? And he brings them back to marry the king. One of them, the oldest one, says, "How can you take me? I'm in love with this other personality, this other prince." And Bhisma says, "Okay, well, you can go back to that prince, and I don't want you. Your heart is already taken by somebody else." It's like in those days, if you fell in love with someone, it was as good as a marriage contract. There's no sense. So the other two daughters marry the king, and the older daughter, she goes back. But when she goes back, Solomon, who she was engaged to, said, "I want nothing to do with you now. You've been kidnapped and taken away to be married to this other person. I don't want nothing to do with you. You've been tarnished." So, in those days, even if you looked at another person, you were considered very soft. So she goes back to Bhisma and says, "I can't go anywhere. I'm not marrying your king, and I can't marry my love. So you must marry me." And he said, "Well, I've taken an oath of celibacy. I cannot marry you. It's just not going to happen." She gets very frustrated and leaves, and they become bitter enemies. And through the course of time, when she dies, she becomes reborn as a male, still in a female form. And she actually appears in the Bhagavad. After the Bhagavad Gita, she appears in the war that happens, and she is a vital ingredient into Bhisma's demise. Bhisma finally dies during the battle that ensues after the year. That's another story for me. Okay, so now we've got this son who is married to these two daughters, Ambika and Ambalika. Well, he gets liver disease from all his drinking. He dies. So now there's no heir to the throne. So Satyavati is beside herself. So she says, "How am I going to have an heir? We need a boy in this family, but I've got two daughters." Well, she had an older son before she got married to King Shantanu. This story, she was, being the daughter of the king of the fishermen, she used to ferry sages across the river. One day a sage had fallen in love with her and wanted to have a physical relationship with her. "Oh no, I can't do that. I can't give up my virginity, not proper." And he says, "I can make love to you in such a way that you won't lose your virginity." And she agrees, and she gets pregnant and has this boy called Vyasadeva. And he leaves home right away and becomes a great sage. In fact, Vyasadeva, he's the author of the Mahabharata, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad. He's the author of all these amazing scriptures. Well, she calls upon him and says, "I want you to mate with his two daughters and give us an heir to the throne." He goes, "Oh my goodness, are you kidding me?" He goes, "I'm pretty rough, I've been living in the forest for all my life, I'm not very attractive to women, She goes, "Yes, I know, but you have, your semen is very powerful and you'll create sons." And so he agrees to this. The women, they are fairly reluctant, but under the orders of their mom, they agree to this arrangement. So the first one, Ambika, she goes into this room where the sage is waiting. She sees him. She's so disgusted, she merely closes her eyes. And she lets him make love to her and get her pregnant. Well, this boy is born, and he's born blind because she had closed her eyes while they were conceiving. Conception is a very interesting thing. The thoughts that are in your mind at the time of conception attracts a type of soul that will be born in the womb. So if the child if the parents are very spiritual, you have a very spiritually born son. In fact, while that child is in the womb, I think around 7, 8 months, the hearing develops. So all the sound vibrations that hear affect how that child, his mentality when he's born. So if you expose your child to much spiritual energy, he'll become a very beautiful child. Anyway, this kid is born blind. That's Dhritarashtra, the creature that we first heard of in the detail. So the next daughter, Ambalika, she goes in to meet the sage and become pregnant. Well, when she sees the sage, she gets sick to her stomach. Or rather, she gets sick. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Anyway, they conceive a child, and this child is born very pale and sickly. This is Pandu. This is the father of the Pandavas, Arjuna and Shiva. So the queen, she's not at all satisfied. She wants to send them back in to try again, have another child. So they send in the maidservant. Now the maidservant, she is thrilled to death. She thinks this is the greatest opportunity of all time that I can have a child that can become heir to the throne. And she greets the sage with an open heart, and they have a beautiful child. His name is Vidura. He's the third brother, and he is very wise. And he's actually, because he was born of a maidservant, he didn't really qualify to become king, but he became their advisor and advisor them on that. So now the time has come. The children are growing up. They're learning to become warriors and eventually become king. So they're about to pronounce Dhritarashtra as king, since he was the oldest child. Vidura speaks up and says, you know, it's really not good to have a blind king, because the blind king, how is he going to rule the country and do like this and like that? Even though he has learned to fight and everything and deal with his blindness, still Pandu would be a better candidate. So they make Pandu the king. So Dhritarashtra, he's a little envious. He's a little upset that he didn't get this position, but he's going along with it. Okay, Pandu's king. So Pandu, he marries Kunti, who's actually Krishna's aunt, and he marries another lady by the name of Maju. And Kunti gets pregnant with Yudhishthira, and the blind king, he actually he goes to this other Svayamvar, and he marries a lady by the name of Gandhari. Gandhari, she's from another kingdom, and she marries Dhritarashtra, but she feels that a wife shouldn't be greater than her husband, so she actually puts a blindfold on, and she submits herself to becoming blind, just like her king. Well, the king was a little upset. He thought she would become his eyes and be able to help her so that he could become king again. And meanwhile, Gandhari's brother, he is very disturbed. His name is Sakuni. And he is very disturbed that his sister has voluntarily become blind and is marrying a blind king. He thinks this is the worst thing that could happen. And he gets hell-bent on revenge. And he actually, as time goes by, he becomes an influence to the sons of Dhritarashtra and Gandhari and gets them on the evil path. And it's also this king who is hell-bent on getting his kingdom back, and he's so disturbed. This is where all the evilness is starting to brew. Now, Pandu, one day he's out in the forest, and he sees he's out hunting, and you know the ruling class, they're called Kshatriyas or warriors. They were the only ones that were allowed to go out and hunt animals. And everybody else was basically vegetarian, but you know the warriors to hone their skills so they could protect the citizens from unwanted elements throughout the forest. So he's out hunting and he sees a deer. Actually, it was a deer playing with a doe, and they were out frolicking in the woods. And he sees his opportunity and he shoots the deer, the buck, and the buck is dying. And the buck and doe, they transform into humans' bodies. And the buck says to the king, "How dare you shoot me? How could you do this? You know, my wife and I, we wanted to enjoy, in a very fun way. So we took the forms of deers, and we're here enjoying it. And now you killed me and left my wife without a husband." He says, "I curse you that if you should ever make love to your wife again, that you will die." And so the king was, "Oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I done?" He asked for forgiveness. So the king, this is actually before they conceive children. The king said, how is this possible that I can become king? I can't have kids. He goes, I'm going to take my two wives and retire into the forest. And Dhritarashtra, the blind one, while I am in the forest away, until I can get over this tragedy, you become king in my place. Well, Dhritarashtra is only too happy to do this. While they're in the forest, Kunti tells him that she has a special blessing. When she was a young girl, she was taking care of a sage who blessed her with this mantra that she could call on any demigod and get pregnant. And so through the course of this mantra, she has 3 children, and which was Arjuna, Bhisma, and Yudhishthira. And the other wife, Maju, Kunti shared the mantra with her so she could have 2 children. So the 5 Pandavas were born. Now Yudhishthira was actually in the womb after Gandhari got pregnant. Gandhari, the blind king, got pregnant first. Okay. But something weird happened with Gandhari. After 9 months, her child did not come out. And many months went by. And actually Yudhishthira was born to Pandu. So he was actually the first child born in the dynasty. So he was destined to become the next king by birthright. Crazy thing was, Gandhari, 2 years, she was still pregnant. And one day she was very disturbed. These are the stories from Mahabharata. She hits her tummy and this lump of flesh comes out of her. And the sages took this flesh and divided it up into 100 pots, and each pot a son grew. And there was one pot where a daughter grew. So she actually had 101 children. These are the 100 boys that were the brothers, cousins, Arjuna and them. Well, after the 5 sons are born to Pandu and Kunti and Arjuna, one day Pandu is going through the woods and he sees Manja, his wife, taking a shower under a waterfall, completely naked. And he just becomes overcome with lust. And he approaches her, and she, without thinking, makes love to him. Pandu dies. And Maji, she can't, what have I done? I should have remembered this curse like that. Well, she enters the funeral pyre with her husband and dies. In fact, in those days, the man and woman were so in love with each other, if the man should die, the wife would enter the fire with the burning body and leave, so they could always be together. Her faith was so strong that this is what would happen. Nowadays, this practice, 100 years ago, this practice was still happening, but it's been outlawed now because it's just not practical. Women thoughts are effective. So anyway, Pandu has died. Dhritarashtra is fully enlisted as king, and his son and Kunti comes with her 5 children to live back in the palace, and everybody's kind of like one big family again. But the boys, under the influence of Uncle Shakuni and their father Dhritarashtra, become enemies with these kids. In fact, one day Yon tries to drown Bhisma. They poison his food and throw him in the river. Bhisma, underwater, is approached by, there's a kingdom under there. A king finds him, and they revive him. And they give him the power of 1,000 elephants. Bhisma becomes a very strong adversary in the war. Are we all good? Keep going? Yeah. Okay. So these kids grow up fighting against each other. Now Yudhishthira, he's made crown prince, and Dyona, he's beside himself. There's more rivalry. There's more bitterness, and so they decide, under the influence of Kunti, they decide how to do away with the Pandavas once and for all. So they said there's a visiting kingdom where Pandu used to go once a year to celebrate. Everybody loved Pandu. So we built a special palace. You go there and take care of these ceremonial things, which they do. Well, Shakuni had arrangements to make this palace with wax in the walls. So this house was extremely flammable. You know, a match would hit one wall, the whole house would burn down to around in seconds. So they figured they were going to burn the Pandavas to death and get rid of them, so that their path to the kingdom would be free and clear. Well, Vidura the wise older son, he found out about what's going on. He knew everything was going on in the house. He warned the Pandavas, and they dug a tunnel for them to escape. And so there was, and as it turns out, there was 5 servants and 1 maidservant that went into the palace to set it on fire. They set it on fire. Bhisma knocks them all out, and they escape through the tunnel. So the whole place burns to the ground. The Pandavas have left. They go into hiding for a year. And when they dig up the rubble, they find 6 skeletons, 5 male and 1 female. They think they've succeeded in killing the Pandavas, but they haven't. Meanwhile, the door says, you guys better stay away from the kingdom for a little while until things settle down. So one day, Arjuna, he hears about another Swayamvar for a beautiful princess. He goes to this contest. And at this contest, to marry this woman, you had to shoot the eye of a fish that was hanging from a ceiling, and you had to do it without looking. You had to look down in a pool of oil, and by looking down in the oil, shoot your arrow and hit the eye of this fish and win this, and then you would be the one that won the princess's hand. Well, Arjuna was a skilled archer, and he was able to do that. He won the princess's hand. He marries her. He actually, before the marriage, he takes her home to his mother Kunti and says, Mom, he's joking around. He says, Mom, I brought you alms. I want to show you these alms we've collected. While they were in hiding for a year, they had to go out and beg for food and alms. And whatever they brought back, the grains of rice or things, the mother said, oh, we'll share it amongst your brothers, you know. You just share the alms amongst your brothers, and we'll all be happy. So he comes back with this bride and says, I got some alms to show you. Without even looking, she said, well, share amongst your brothers. And so he goes, but Mom! Anyway, they took her word, she just said that. So, and her name was Draupadi. She ends up marrying the 5 brothers. This is sort of like, the mind marrying the 5 senses. So they grow up, all one big happy family. They made an arrangement where every year a different brother would be a woman, something like that. So they come back to the kingdom after they got married, and everybody's surprised. You guys are still alive? Oh my goodness! And so now Shakuni, so now Yudhishthir is pronounced king, but there's a big rivalry. Duryodhana is very upset. You can't give him the kingdom, so they don't know what to do. They decide to split the kingdom in half. And Duryodhana will eventually rule after his father Dhritarashtra passes on the main kingdom of Hastinapur. And they're going to give this other place, this other piece of land called Indraprastha to the Pandavas. Indraprastha is a dry forest where only snakes live and it's scorpions. I mean, it's like desert stuff. Well, the Pandavas go there with Krishna and they built this amazing palace, this amazing kingdom. They made an agreement with the snakes not to be bothered by them. And it's just the most beautiful place you can't even imagine, which makes Arjuna even more jealous and more upset. So they make another arrangement where they invite the Pandavas over for a gambling match. And they have this gambling match where Shakuni, the evil uncle, he's got these loaded dice. And every time they roll the dice, the Pandavas lose. First it's some money, then it's some jewels, then it's the army, then they lose the whole kingdom. Then, with nothing left of that, and Yudhishthir, as gambling goes, became addicted and thinks, well, with the next roll, I'll win and get everything back, and we can go on. Well, eventually, he puts up his brothers as a wage, and he loses them. Then he loses himself. Now he's got absolutely nothing left. And Shakuni says, oh, but you have your beautiful wife, Draupadi. So he puts her up as a wager and loses. So one of Duryodhana's brothers goes to Draupadi and drags her into the court, and she is furious. How can my husband put me up as a wager, especially if they've lost? This is not right. This is not possible. He can't even wager. How is this? Anyway, they tried to disrobe her in this assembly, and they're starting to pull off her sari. And she goes to everybody. She goes to the king. She goes to the grandsire. She goes to the brother. She goes to her husbands. The husbands are now slaves of the evil brother. Nobody can lift a finger. Nobody can do a thing. And she can't believe it. And then she throws her hands up to Krishna. Krishna. So as the evil brother is trying to pull her robes off, Krishna is supplying more fabric. And every inch that's coming off, another inch is coming on. So you can never expose her naked. And so there's a pile of fabric 10 feet high, and nobody can understand it, because Krishna had protected his dear devotee. So the king, he thinks this whole thing is ludicrous, and he restores everything back to Yudhishthira. Yodhana is now super furious. We won this fair and square, and he's furious. So they said, well, we're going to have one more roll of the dice. And this time, even though they have all their kingdom back, if you should lose, you are exiled to the forest for 12 years. And a 13th year in hiding. So if we find you in that 13th year, you got to do another 12 years. They figured this way they would get rid of him. Anyway, they rolled the dice, and of course, Arjuna and his brothers lost, and they exiled for 12 years. The third year, they went into hiding. And when they came back, they were to get their kingdom back. Well, they said the very last day of the 13th year that we found out where you were hiding. And of course, that wasn't really the case. It made the 13th year complete, but they made this big fuss. Anyway, they said, we're not giving you back your land. And they said, well, why don't you just give us 5 villages? Just give us something. They said, I wouldn't even give you a speck of dust. Yeah. So this incited the war. Well, if we're not getting what's rightfully ours, we're going to fight for it. So this is how this war is starting. And even Krishna, he went one last time to the king and said, hey, let's have peace. Let's not fight over this, just give the kids something. They tried to even arrest Krishna. And at that moment, Krishna expanded himself 50 feet tall with the Sudarshan chakra and did the hands up to everybody, just to show that he is God. But still, after that, everybody settled down, and the war started. And so this is where we have where the Bhagavad Gita is spoken. And you can see the correlations between all the evil things within us, the fight that we have, the struggle for good and evil, and how we're going to overcome this. The Gita goes to the point where Arjuna realizes who he is, who God is, and what my duties are, and how I should live my life accordingly. And when he's prepared to fight, that is the end of the Gita. The Mahabharata goes on to explain all the details of the war. The war goes on for 15 days. The events of the war are just amazing. One event after another after another. We don't really have enough time to go into this war, but it's really quite an amazing story. We'll do that for another time. The events that happen, and then eventually the Pandavas, they become victorious. Duryodhana and his brothers are wiped out. So Yudhishthira, they become reinstated as the righteous king. And the mother Gandhara, she curses Krishna and all the followers. So eventually they all pass on, and this is how Krishna leaves the planet. Like that. But the essence is that we come to understand that we have a loving relationship with God, with one another, and how we can defeat these evil desires within us by loving God, and how we can become spiritual. So just with that, story. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Or think it all the way through. Similar to some of the Old Testament stories, right? Yeah, it's all not terrible. Yeah. Oh, right, yeah. Overlapping, yes. Yeah, there really is. There really is a lot of overlapping between the two. But, yeah. You also bring to mind, there's another character in the Old Testament. Yeah, I think it was with the Maccabees. there's a lot of similarities in the scriptures. It's kind of the same lessons have been taught. And I think, and I've studied other philosophies, other worlds and mythologies and things, and there's a great overlapping. And I think in the old days that these stories are told to teach us lessons. And if you live in one land or you live in another land, the stories that are told are in relationship to what's around you. Like the American Indian is telling stories of their spirit souls behind these different animals and different things. It's kind of like the demigods. Yes, place, time, and circumstances like the rice of these stories. Now it's interesting, in the Bible, especially in the books of Genesis and the Revelation, there's things that are mentioned that is this really reality or is this a story? I mean, basically, yeah, we're supposed to get the spiritual lesson. And at the same time, there are those that say these stories actually took place. These books actually took place. Something has taken place, thousands of years ago. Whether, and even if you call them aliens, if we today call them aliens from another world, come down and do these things, and we make these stories about the aliens, well, Krishna is an alien. He's from another planet. Aliens are not necessarily these monster type creatures that are meant to destroy the planet and eat us all up. I mean, they're actually beings from other worlds. And as they descended to Earth to help us grow and learn and develop, different stories from different points of view have generated. I mean, even the story I'm telling today, I'm sure every one of you has a different idea in your mind how it relates to you, what it means to you, and therefore something that can help you in your life in your spiritual walk and together. Well, I'd like to end with a little prayer. Thank you, Lord, for blessing this gathering, and may everyone here grow from this experience and this story about the history and teachings of you and your devoted ones. May we go forth into this world carrying your love in our hearts, and that we may be a light for everyone we meet and everyone we have yet to meet. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity. God bless everybody.